So in this video, we are going to discuss foundation. So foundation is basically the base of all of our makeup. It is one of the most important parts of our makeup for stage makeup, and it is critical that you find a foundation that matches your skin tone and your undertone. So the reason in stage makeup that we really need to use foundation is a lot of times when we are under the really intense stage lights, our skin can kind of become washed out. And then sometimes too, you can see a lot of like shadows get cast on the face that may not be the most flattering thing in the entire world because we're just not used to being under such intense stage lighting. So a lot of times we are just putting on some kind of a foundation just to kind of like put everything back to how it would be if we were not under stage lighting, if that makes sense. So, you know, how I look to someone's eye when I'm standing close to them is not going to be how I look if I am on stage and the really bright spotlight is on me and somebody is looking at me from 100 feet away. I don't necessarily think that everybody needs corrective makeup because there's something that they need to correct about themselves. I think that is something that a lot of people don't always, I feel like, convey like in the best way. So just because you are told to do corrective makeup for theater doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with the way that you look. It doesn't mean that you need to change your face shape, you need to look like a different person. All it means is that we are just trying to have your face be seen by the audience. Honestly, that's probably like the easiest way to put it. If you're having a hard time like understanding that concept, or you just don't necessarily think that it's going to make that big of a difference, honestly, until you see it, you're probably going to feel that way. I think that's perfectly fine to feel that way because it does seem a little bit like, okay, how different could someone really look? But a lot of the times, if you put somebody on stage with no makeup on at all, and then you compare it to when they're on stage in full basic makeup, which would, for a lot of people, that's just like a little bit of foundation and maybe like some eyebrows, which we will discuss later on in time. It really is different. So a lot of times too, you might go see a performance, or when you're watching people on TV, they probably don't look like they have any kind of foundation on, but most of the time, if somebody is on camera or they're being seen on stage, they probably have some kind of foundation on. So as much as not everybody like really loves to wear makeup, it is really important. And for us in theater, we're really just trying to make sure that our features don't get lost when we are on these really big stages and super far away from people under these really intense stage lights. So as far as trying to decide like what kind of foundation you should get, other than one that matches you, which we discussed a lot in our color theory video, the most important things are you have to take into consideration what kind of skin type do you have? So is your skin oilier? Is your skin dry? Do you have normal skin? Is it a combination of oily and dry? Certain foundation formulas are going to be made for certain types of skin. So if you're really oily, then you don't want to get a foundation that says that it's dewy or it's super rich and moisturizing, because that could make you look oilier. And if you're very dry, then you're not going to want to get a foundation that is mattifying, because that could make your skin even drier. So it's really important to kind of think back to our skincare and think about what it is that your skin needs so that it can feel its best and look its best and be the most comfortable. Another thing you have to think about is what kind of coverage you would like. So in theater, we typically use something that's going to be more like a medium to full coverage, because again, you're under really, really intense lighting. So sometimes the like lighter coverage foundations don't necessarily give you the effect that you will need when you're going to be at such a great distance from someone under such intense stage lights. But if you were to be doing something that was going to be filmed, a lot of times foundations that are used for film, like the HD and 4K ones, a lot of times those can actually be a little bit thinner. The 4K ones I have, I will say those are actually like very full coverage, but a lot of HD foundations that you will find, those are often a little bit lighter, just because if the camera is going to be so close to somebody, you want to make sure that the makeup is really undetectable. So it kind of depends on what situation you're in for that, but really generally speaking, for our purposes for theater, you're going to want something that's going to be more like a medium to full coverage. Something else you want to think about is what kind of like a finish you want your foundation to have. So again, in theater, I think it is typically better if you go for something that has more of like either like a normal or like a matte finish. If you go with something that has that really like dewy, glowy finish that's so popular right now, you're gonna end up looking a little bit oily, especially like when you're under bright lights. I think you can probably see it on my face right now. I just have on like a little bit of highlighter and I look extremely oily when I turn my face in certain ways because of my ring light and the lighting that I have. So it's just something you have to think about when you're getting photographed or you're like close up on camera. the way you look is a lot different. So if you really love how your foundation photographs and you're so like glowy and dewy, that's great. But when you get on stage and that light hits you, it might just kind of look like you're oily. So it's one of those things where you might have a certain kind of foundation that you're using for stage that you don't necessarily like to use in your everyday life. Just because a lot of times we don't like how things look when they're matte, especially because that is not in trend right now. But it's going to be a little bit better as far as like, I guess like visual purposes go. If you go with something a little bit matter for stage, I don't think anyone's necessarily going to come after you if you don't, but you may notice that you look just a little bit oily if you do go for something that's a little bit dewier. So kind of think about that. You also have to think about like how long you want your foundation to be on. So generally, again, since we're talking about theater here, you usually need to stay on for a while. Like you're probably, if it's like a photo shoot, that's when you're going to see people that aren't like setting foundations or it's something quick, they can put on something that's just going to rub off. It doesn't matter. But when you're in theater, a lot of times you have 2 shows, you might be working outside, you might have a ton of changes, you might be dancing. So you're probably going to want something that is going to be long wear. And that's really going to hold on, just so that way you don't have to worry about touching up your makeup 1,000 times, because you have a lot of other things that you need to be worrying about, like remembering your lines and everything else that you're supposed to do, right? And then another thing to consider, some people like to have SPF in their foundation. One thing I will caution you against if you're going to do that is sometimes SPF will cause flashback. So if you're going to be in like a photo shoot, or if it's like the night that they're going to be taking photos or something, you may not want to have the SPF in there, just because there is a possibility that could cause some flashback. And then sometimes too, I have felt like it kind of can oxidize a little bit on the skin too. So if you're somebody, especially for like paler people, I feel like, where makeup seems to oxidize, I don't know if this is just, again, a personal observation of mine, but check and see if it has any kind of SPF or sun protection, because I kind of feel like that can sometimes cause a little oxidation and cause your foundation to kind of change colors and become something that you don't want it to be. So kind of watch out for that. And then you need to decide what kind of form you want your makeup in. So for foundation, you can get a liquid foundation, which is going to feel kind of just like a moisturizer. You can get a cream foundation, which is going to be more like the Ben Nye creams or Krylon or Mehron, a lot of the things that we're more familiar with in theater. You can do a powder foundation, you can do water activated foundation, which that's kind of like that classic like pancake makeup, and also aqua color. There's a lot of different options, and again, that's going to come down to like what kind of coverage do you need, and what's your skin type and what kind of finish. So I have found that I think that creams are a little bit easier if you're trying to like highlight and contour and blend a lot of things all together, but there's a lot of people that use liquid foundations and do all of those things. So I think in theater we more typically use creams, just because that's just kind of been how everybody's done it. But honestly, like whatever you prefer using and whatever looks best on you and you're most comfortable with, that's what you want to get, just because you're going to be the one that's putting your makeup on most of the time. So you want to make sure that you get something that you like, and you're not just getting it because your teacher told you to get it, or that's what they've been using for years. Like, you really do need to figure out what works best for you. So we'll get a little bit more into like the different types later, but and you know, certain times of year you might like a thicker foundation in the winter because your skin get dry, and you might want a lighter liquid in the summer because you're a little bit oilier. So it just kind of depends sometimes on the situation you're in too. And then you need to think about how much money you want to spend on it. So you can get foundations like from e.l.f. and NYX that like aren't very expensive, and then you can buy foundations that are like $80 probably if you wanted to. So I think that there are great foundations at every price range. I don't think you have to spend $1 million to get really amazing coverage, a really amazing product. If you want to spend $1 million on it, you also can do that. So I think that's something you have to think about too, is how much do you want to spend on it, because you could really find things, especially now with how popular makeup is, you can find things at any price range. So you don't have to feel limited. If you don't want to spend a ton of money on it, if you're just buying it and for one show or something, you don't want to spend $30 on a foundation, you could probably find a lot of really great ones that are like $10 and under, and even cheaper if you know where to look, or if you buy refill sizes of things. That's a really great way to get enough foundation that will take you through a run of a show, and then you wouldn't have any left over and you don't spend a ton of money. So that's one little secret there. And then finally too, you need to watch out for what the ingredients are in your foundation. So if you're allergic to something, you want to make sure it is not in your foundation, right? So there are plenty of different ingredients that could end up in your foundation. Like, we have had students in the past that have been allergic to alcohol in their makeup, allergic to palmitate, there are people, like I'm allergic to a lot of like random dyes and things like that, so it's really important to always look at the ingredients if you know that you have allergies. You know, if you need gluten-free makeup, you need to make sure that the makeup that you're using is gluten-free. There's a lot of vegan makeup out there, there's a lot of clean beauty out there, so you just need to make sure if there are certain things that you don't want in your makeup and that's important to you, or if there's certain things that cannot be in your makeup, make sure that you really check through what the ingredients are. A lot of times what's listed on the package is not always the same as what's listed online. Sometimes online they'll put a little bit more. So you might need to do a little bit of digging, especially if you do have a serious allergy. Watch out for a lot of the more natural makeup that might have like nut products in it that you may not be thinking about. That's a really big one. That's a really important one. So just be really cautious, just because especially with how much like clean and all natural beauty makeup is out there now, there's a lot of things that might have allergens in them that maybe necessarily we didn't have to worry about before. Another thing to kind of be conscious of is, again, if you're buying any kind of foundations with powder in them, too many thoughts at once, right? If you're buying any foundations with SPF in them, that could cause flashback, but also whatever powder you're setting your foundation with, that could cause flashback too. So make sure you're kind of like free of SPF in general if someone's gonna be taking a lot of pictures of you, just so you don't take that risk, because anything that has silica in it, so that would be more like your setting powders, that's what could cause flashback. And it is a lot of times a lot of the HD makeup that has that, so just be careful with that. So as far as like picking out like what different types of foundation you could get, so you could do a liquid foundation. So I think a lot of people like liquid because it kind of soaks into the skin, and it doesn't feel as heavy, but there are very thick, heavy liquid foundations. But that's kind of one thing that a lot of people, I think, like with that. You can put it on with your hands a little bit more easily. Sometimes those are self-setting. So if something is self-setting, it doesn't technically need powder to set it. If something does not say it is self-setting, you definitely need to powder it in order to get it to stay on. If you are going on stage, even if you're wearing a self-setting foundation, it is in your best interest to powder it, just because you're going to be under intense lighting, intense movement conditions, possibly heavy costumes. You really just want to make sure that it stays on. So be really mindful of that. Creams, you can get a sheer to full coverage in a cream. Again, they're very blendable. They're great if somebody has dry skin. But you definitely usually need some kind of a powder to set them. There's a few creams out there that I know of that will dry down on their own, but generally speaking, for most things that are out there, you really should get a setting powder if you're going to get a cream foundation. There's also powder foundations. So powder foundations on their own are usually going to be a little bit like of a lighter coverage, but what I like to do with them is I like to set foundations with them, because that way if you have a foundation, like my own personal foundation is a little bit off from what my skin tone is, but when I set it with a specific foundation, like powder foundation that I have, that kind of tones it. So that's one thing, if you do struggle to find like your perfect match, sometimes you can tone it with your powder foundation. And I like to use those to highlight and contour too, because they tend to be a little bit softer than a lot of like eyeshadows and things that we could be using for that. So they're good if you have oily skin, because they usually, they're kind of dense and they will kind of like suck up any oil, and they're good for like really quick touch-ups. And if you just want like, if you just have like a little bit of redness, a powder foundation would knock that out really quickly. So those are really great. And then you're going to have your water activated foundations. So these are more of like a classic kind of a theater thing. So really, like back in the day, like everybody used to use pancake makeup, and pancake makeup is a dry makeup that is water activated. A lot of people still use that. It's really popular in places where it's really humid, because it holds up extremely well to humidity. So that is one thing, one situation where you might see somebody using that. They can be a little bit tricky to use. You really have to like buff them into the skin, but some people will use them over their other foundations in order to kind of set them a little bit better. And then another really popular like foundation, but it's more like a face and body paint, would be like all your water activated paints. So that would be Krylen's Aqua Color. That's the one I have the most experience with. I think Ben Nye's are called Magic Cakes. Paradise Paint by Mayron. A lot of people are creating water activated makeup. This is something I don't personally like it as like a foundation, because it dries kind of like a little too matte, but a lot of people will use it in dance. They'll use it to paint their point shoes and like their ballet shoes so that they match their skin color a little bit better. People use it to like dye fabrics and paint fabrics. And then a lot of people will use it like if you're ever in a performance and like you need to like paint yourself pink or something. it might be easier to use like a cream foundation on your face, but if you use a water activated one on your body, that's going to be self-setting and dry down, and then you can just like spray yourself down with a setting spray, and that's going to hold really nicely. So those personally I don't really like to use on the face. I think Pancake would be a little bit better for that, but there are people who like it. It's really popular with cosplay because it's a really long-lasting foundation. So that is another possibility. Again, I have the most experience with the Krylon ones, but there are other brands who make it as well. As far as like how you're gonna apply foundation goes, so some people you'll see, I think it's really popular to see like all the influencers and everything, they just are like pouring foundation all over their face. You really don't need to do that. Realistically, if you just, it's kind of like almost like a star. Some people think about it, but really if you just have like a little here and a little here and here and here, you can kind of just like blend it out, and that way you're getting enough coverage without totally like caking yourself in your makeup. Technically, it's great if you use like a brush or a sponge to put it on. However, you are the one doing your makeup, so if you put it on with your hands, that is up to you. Just make sure if you're going to do that, that your hands are sanitary. I will never apply makeup to someone else's face with my hands. It would have to be a very like specific situation that I would ever do that, but if that is ever the case, just make sure your hands are like washed and sanitized properly. But realistically, you should really be using like a brush or a sponge. So typical kind of like foundation brushes to apply foundation with would be grab all these, would be something that's like a little bit flatter, usually like these. So this one is a little bit small. This is more like concealer probably, but this kind of a shape is really good to apply your foundation with. And then me personally, I really like something like this to kind of blend it out. So stuff that's like a little bit stubbier like this, that's going to be really great for blending, because when I always say you can like apply it however, but when you're blending it, you're going to be doing like little circles, which I'll have other videos for, and something like this is really going to help you work it into the skin. A beauty blender would work in the same way as this. The little like white like cosmetic sponges that we all have probably seen at some point in our lives, they work the same way. It's just this kind of a shape is great. Another kind of brush, you can get one that's like this. That's going to be really good to buff things in. It's really just anything with that density that's really going to help you work it into the skin. So those are just kind of like generalized. Everybody kind of has their own favorite brushes. So if you hate these and you have something else that you like, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you keep your brushes clean, like we've discussed before, and you keep your hands clean, and you can really apply it however you want. And then something else that's really important is a lot of times people get really confused between foundation and concealer. So the way I like to think about it is foundation is for all over and concealer is for something that's really specific. So when I'm color correcting, I'm doing something specific. So I'm probably going to use like my smaller brush that I have here to do that. So I'll come in and do something specific and small with this, but then I'm like, time to blend my entire face, I'm gonna need something bigger, right? However, that doesn't mean that you can't use the two interchangeably. So if you have a concealer and it matches your skin tone perfectly, use it as your foundation. If you have foundation and it covers what you need to, great, that's your concealer. People will use concealer to highlight and contour. Really, they're the same products. So you can kind of use them very interchangeably. Just in regards to like color correcting, if you have to do something like that, you need to do that first, and then you would layer like the skin tone, whether it's a skin tone concealer or a skin tone foundation over that. And then the very most important thing and very last step, especially for you when you're doing stage makeup, is to set your makeup. So if you are using, honestly, even if it is like a self-setting foundation, unless someone is like airbrushing you, even then I still powder. Because I'm a very oily person, so even with airbrush foundation, I still powder my face. But please put some kind of setting powder over your makeup. A setting spray alone is not going to be strong enough because it's that powder that's really going to go in and dry your makeup up. Like if I took powder to where I'm starting to get really oily, that's going to mattify it instantly, and that's going to lock it in a lot better than if I just sprayed my face down with setting spray. Because this is my face with setting spray and setting powder, and I'm still getting very oily. So setting powder is super important. One thing that I hate is they try to sell those like colorless translucent powders, and they'll work for everyone. They don't. A white colorless powder, really, unless you are like as pale as I am, I think it makes people look kind of chalky and ashy. So you can get a translucent powder, but you can get one that is tinted. So I really recommend, I like to match powders to undertones. So I would find the translucent powder that matches your undertone and the depth of your skin tone too. So it may not be like the exact match or like your exact shade, but if you can at least like lock in that undertone and like the general like depth of your skin, that's going to be so much better for you than using a powder that's too light, because that can make you look ashy, it can make you look gray. If a powder's too pink, you'll look pink. If it's too yellow, it'll turn you yellow. So you just really want to make sure that you're getting the appropriate translucent powder for your skin tone. So translucent powders can come looser pressed, but basically if it's translucent, it's going to be a little bit color depositing because, you know, they are tinted, or it is white and colorless and it's going to make you paler, but they're not as pigmented as like a foundation powder would be. So they're mostly just to set your makeup, but if you really want to set your makeup and add color, then you would use like a pressed powder foundation. If you're really oily, you can also use anti-shine powders. So at least the one that I'm familiar with from Krylon has rice starch in it, so it's kind of like those little like rice papers that people will use to absorb oil. It's a thicker, denser, more drying powder, so I usually recommend, I would probably only use that like in the T-zone, at least on me or somebody with skin like mine, where that's where I get the oiliest, because usually cheeks are a little bit too dry for something like that. Or you can use a blot powder. So blot powder is really good to kind of do quick touch-ups without messing up the color of your makeup. So if you're touching up with a powder foundation, it's going to add more color to your face, and you may not always want to do that, but generally if you're using like a blot powder, those are a little bit more translucent. You still want to get one that is tinted to your skin tone, but those are usually just going to kind of like absorb the oil, and then you're good to go. So some kind of powder is really important. Again, watch out for ones with silica in it, because you don't want to end up with any flashback or anything. But just don't fall for the like trick, I think, of like you can just use a setting spray. I think it's really important when you're going to be wearing it for as long as you're often wearing it on stage and under the stage lights, and if you're dancing and singing and just acting in general. You know, you do so much with your face, all of the movement can really disturb all of the makeup, so it's really just going to help if you really lock it in with powder. So you don't have to sit there and like put tons of it on and like bake under your eyes and all the places that you want to be lighter and like brighter, like a highlight, which we'll talk more about in class, but at least put something on there and you will be better off. You can use a powder puff, you can use a brush. My personal favorite, as I get way too bright, my personal favorite brush is like a little like flat one like this. I really love this. This is just from e.l.f. It's like $3, but like again, like the brushes that are a little bit denser like that are just so much better for like packing things on and blending things in. So I prefer those. You can use powder puffs, you can use beauty blenders. People use that with baking, and again, baking is just anywhere usually people where like they highlight their face, so where they want it to just kind of like pop a little bit more, not necessarily to lighten your skin, but to just kind of like make sure that those areas pop better than like your blush or your contour. People will layer quite a bit of like a loose translucent powder there, and they'll just kind of let that sit while they like do their eye makeup or their lips or whatever, and it kind of helps your makeup not crease quite as much, and it helps it just last a little bit longer. However, you're not always going to have the time to sit and do that, so as long as you're powdering your face, that is better than nothing, but certainly baking will help it stay on a little bit longer, and a lot of people like the finish that it kind of gives their foundation as well. So hopefully this helps make foundation make a little bit more sense, and I hope you can find your perfect one.